Imagine living in a 30-room royal mansion with your ex-spouse. Every afternoon, you stop whatever you're doing for tea together. The chef prepares a fresh cream cake every single day, even if yesterday's was never touched. Full meals are cooked from scratch, only to end up in the bin because someone suddenly decides they'd rather go out for lunch instead. Personal trainers wait around for clients who rarely show up. Staff never quite know what the day will bring. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew spends his days horse riding around Windsor, watching television, playing video games, and refusing to consider moving out of one of the largest royal homes in Britain. It sounds like something from a television drama, but according to royal biographer Andrew Lownie, former staff members say this was everyday life inside Royal Lodge. Today we're taking a look inside the strange world Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Sarah Ferguson created behind the gates of Royal Lodge, and why so many people believe it became a symbol of a royal lifestyle that simply couldn't last forever. When Andrew and Sarah Ferguson divorced in 1996, most people assumed they would eventually go their separate ways. Instead, they did something almost nobody expected. Although their marriage ended, their friendship didn't. Over the years, they remained unusually close, raising Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie together and continuing to appear at family events side by side. Then, around 2004, Sarah moved back into Royal Lodge, the sprawling 30-room mansion in Windsor Great Park that Andrew leased from the Crown Estate. From the outside, it looked like one of the most unusual living arrangements in the royal family. Inside, according to Sarah herself, it worked perfectly. In a 2018 interview, she described them as the happiest divorced couple in the world. She explained that every single afternoon they sat together for tea. Sarah said it wasn't just a habit, it was an important part of their daily lives. She said they listened to each other, respected each other's opinions, and often gathered around the table with their daughters whenever they were visiting. It sounded warm, almost wholesome, but according to former members of staff interviewed years later, afternoon tea was only one small part of an incredibly privileged daily routine. Royal Lodge itself was no ordinary house. Originally built in the 17th century and later expanded, it became the home of the Queen Mother for decades before Andrew moved in. The property sits within Windsor Great Park and includes extensive grounds, stables, and dozens of rooms. Maintaining a property that size costs millions of pounds over time. Heating, roofing, security, gardening, and repairs don't come cheap. Even while Andrew's public role disappeared following the Epstein scandal, the mansion continued operating much as it always had. And according to Andrew Lownie, that extended to life inside the house as well. Lownie has spent years researching Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's life and speaking with former royal employees. One story stood out more than almost any other. Every day, the chef reportedly baked Sarah Ferguson a fresh cream cake. Not every few days, every single day. If yesterday's cake had barely been touched, it didn't matter. The next day, another completely fresh cake would be prepared. Former staff claimed yesterday's simply went in the bin. It became one of the most talked about examples of waste inside Royal Lodge. On its own, one cake might not sound particularly shocking, but staff said it reflected a much bigger pattern. According to Lownie's reporting, meals were frequently prepared from scratch using fresh ingredients, only for plans to change at the last minute.
Sometimes Sarah reportedly decided she wanted to eat somewhere else. Sometimes the meal simply wasn't eaten. Rather than serving leftovers later, staff claimed the food was thrown away. Former employees described an environment where everything always had to be freshly prepared, regardless of whether perfectly good food was already available. Lownie compared the atmosphere to something from another era, suggesting Royal Lodge operated with expectations that felt completely disconnected from how most people live today. He stressed these accounts came from former members of staff, but several described similar experiences. The stories didn't stop with the food. According to former employees, personal trainers remained on standby, despite appointments often being cancelled or simply never happening. One member of staff reportedly had the job of organising Sarah's medications and daily schedule. Others described constantly changing plans that left employees scrambling throughout the day. Lownie even recounted claims that some staff members became so frustrated by the unpredictability that they ended up in tears. Whether every individual story can be independently verified is impossible to say. But together, they paint a picture of a household where convenience always came first, regardless of the cost. While Sarah's routine reportedly revolved around entertaining, afternoon tea, and spontaneous changes of plan, Andrew's days appeared remarkably consistent. For years, he was known as an enthusiastic horseman. Residents around Windsor frequently spotted him riding through the park's trails. Friends have long described horses as one of his greatest passions. When he wasn't riding, Andrew reportedly enjoyed watching television, spending time indoors, and playing video games. Hobbies that have appeared in several biographies and newspaper profiles over the years. As his royal responsibilities disappeared after 2019, those quiet routines reportedly became an even larger part of everyday life. Unlike many former working royals who found new careers or charitable roles, Andrew largely withdrew from public view. Royal Lodge became his world. Visitors became less frequent. Official engagements disappeared. But inside the gates, life reportedly carried on much as it always had. That became increasingly difficult for King Charles to ignore. By the time Charles became king, the monarchy was under enormous pressure to modernise and reduce costs. Public opinion toward Andrew had collapsed. He was no longer carrying out royal duties. His military titles had been removed. His patronages were gone. Yet he was still living in one of the Crown Estate's largest homes. Reports soon emerged that Charles had encouraged Andrew to move into the much smaller Frogmore Cottage. Andrew reportedly refused. Royal Lodge wasn't simply where he lived, it represented continuity. Leaving would have meant acknowledging that life had fundamentally changed. For decades, Andrew and Sarah had presented themselves as proof that divorce didn't have to destroy a family. In many ways, they succeeded. They remained close friends. They raised 2 daughters together. They celebrated holidays together. They even drank afternoon tea together every single day. But the routines that once seemed charming gradually began to look very different. To critics, the stories about untouched cream cakes, abandoned meals, standby staff, and a refusal to leave a 30-room mansion painted the picture of 2 people living inside a royal bubble long after the rest of the institution had changed. Andrew Lownie has argued that Royal Lodge became almost like a time capsule. Outside its gates, the monarchy was shrinking, adapting, and trying to rebuild public trust. Inside, according to former staff, many of the old routines continued exactly as they always had. On the outside, people weren't just questioning Andrew's future, they were questioning the lifestyle itself. And perhaps that's why the stories about cream cakes have attracted so much attention. They're not really about dessert, they're about a household that many believe continued operating as though nothing had changed, even while everything around it had. For years, Royal Lodge represented comfort, familiarity, and routine for Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. But eventually, those same routines became symbols of a royal world that was rapidly disappearing. And in the end, no amount of afternoon tea could stop that reality from catching up.